Welcome to our Building Blocks for Cognitive Success webinar series. Today's topic is going to be Pace Yourself to Help Manage Neurofatigue. As we go through, we're going to talk a little bit about neurofatigue, give you some definitions, and then we're going to try and give you some strategies for pacing yourself. We'll begin with an iterative review. If you have joined the series previously, you'll know that we had an Intro to Cognitive Rehabilitation webinar. And we also had the 4 stages of learning webinar. So we'll do just a quick review and then we'll jump into today's topics. Cognitive rehabilitation is the process of addressing cognitive challenges in order to help people with a variety of neurological conditions improve daily life skills in a systematic and practical way. Again, I have systematic and practical bold here because I think that's really key. Cognitive rehab is definitely a systematic approach, but it has to be practical, I believe, if it's really going to be successful. It can also help with a variety of neurological conditions. If you are living with brain injury or MS or dealing with some of the impact of long COVID, Parkinson's, cognitive rehab can help a lot with a variety of different conditions. There's 3 goals that are typically set as it relates to cognitive rehab. It's designed to improve practical life skills, to increase your independence, and to improve your quality of life. Why is this important? Because you really want to increase your self-awareness. We're going to be talking about self-awareness in the next webinar series or in the next webinar. Really important. You're also going to identify your strengths and your challenges. And you're going to search and find some effective strategies to help you make life a little bit more easy, hopefully. We also talked about the 4 stages of learning. The first stage was ignorance, and I know people are turned off by that term, but it really is just simply you don't know what you don't know. You're unaware that you're being impacted by something. From that point, you get to awareness, where you are aware that you're struggling with something. Then you go into the learning stage. At that point, there is lots of time and lots of practice. It requires a lot of focus, a lot of energy. But as you do that learning, you can eventually, hopefully, end up in the mastery stage where things are just a bit more automatic for you. You really don't have to spend so much time and energy focused on those particular skills or strategies. So this is the icon I was telling you about. This is our chat and questions icon. Any thoughts or questions about that iterative review? Hopefully, if you've been with us, you are taking away some of the information that you got from those webinars. Anyone have any thoughts about that? Got it, Maureen? Okay, beautiful. All right, then let's go ahead and start with our presentation. Fatigue is something that people experience in general. Individuals that are struggling with cognitive challenges, individuals that don't have any kind of cognitive challenges. Fatigue is really an extreme tiredness that results from mental or physical exertion or illness. So if you have a cold, you can get really fatigued and extremely tired. So that's the basic definition of fatigue. And that's something that you have to be aware of because that's what we all experience. Types of fatigue can include physical, like when you've done too much physically exertion, working out, etc. Emotional, when you're in very highly emotional situations, people can get fatigued. Cognitive and mental, so if you're doing a prolonged cognitive activity, you can get fatigued from that. Social situations, when you're engaged in social interactions, you can get very fatigued. And also stress. So again, these types of fatigue sort of apply to everybody. We all experience. The difference is neurofatigue is when a person feels so mentally tired that they can't really do anything else. They just can't function. So you take all the different types of fatigue that we just mentioned, social and emotional and physical, and you get to the point where you just can't do anything that you want to do or that you need to do. That's sort of a broad definition of neurofatigue. It is something that that people experience with a variety of different conditions. A lot of people call neurofatigue, they're starting to call it kind of brain fog. That's another term that is sort of like neurofatigue. Brain fog is a little bit more general, but you may have heard that particular term. So neurofatigue is not like everyone else's idea of being tired, right, Christy?
Amen.
Christy will share some of her ideas as we finish up this slide. Unable to complete a simple day-to-day task. Everything requires extreme effort. If you're living with a brain injury or you're experiencing neurofatigue, something that you might have just been able to do without any effort at all or without having to think about it before is now, it just takes so much out of you. An inability to think or even talk with others sometimes can be an issue. It happens at any time, even when you're enjoying yourself, which I think is a really important thing to be aware of. You go somewhere and you're having a good time, and all of a sudden this cloud sort of hits you and neurofatigue takes over. And it's hard to understand why, I'm enjoying myself, but it can happen at any time. It can also last for a few hours or even days. That's one of the other things that differentiates neurofatigue from just sort of a basic fatigue that people in general might experience. A basic fatigue, you rest, you lie down, and it kind of goes away and you get rejuvenated. Neurofatigue doesn't necessarily alleviate with rest. It's something that can take hours or days to really recover from. So, Christy, I'm going to put us back up on screen here. Do you want to share some of your thoughts and ideas about this?
So one thing that I think each survivor would understand and relate to is that cartoon Coyote where he would I have heard the expression hit the wall,
Mm.
and he slides down. Like Michelle said, neurofatigue comes out of sometimes nowhere. You're doing everything's going great, and then all of a sudden, there's just this off button, and you hit a wall, and you cannot get up. And I have had experiences where you just feel like you're sliding. You've hit the wall, and you're literally just sliding, and you've got to go to bed, and it just shut down. And so I'm sure a lot can relate to that.
Let's go to our chat and discussion. So there's a
We've got
couple
a
of,
great question.
yeah, I know, I saw that. Lisa asked, should you recalibrate your view of mastery to accommodate lower targets following brain injury or aim for your pre-stroke or pre-injury performance? That's such a great question, Lisa. My perspective on this, I like to use a concept called goal attainment scaling. And I think it applies to this area of learning and mastery and goal setting. The idea is that, Lisa, you may want to, I'm going to use reading as an example because it's simple. You may want to read the entire chapter in one sitting, okay? Or for you, you want to write your entire article in one sitting. And that might be sort of the ultimate. If you could do that, that would be absolutely amazing. But the reality is you probably can't do that right off the bat. And so what you want to do is exactly sort of that recalibrate. Look at, when you're talking about this, think about something that a level that you can accomplish with some challenge. So it's not just, oh yeah, I can do this, no problem. You want a goal that you can set for yourself where you're going to challenge yourself, but it's realistic. You're really sure that you can accomplish it. And then from that point, you're going to put some additional tick marked, so to speak. And you're going to say, well, if I can do this and I feel pretty good, what would the next level be? So for instance, you might say, I'm going to write this article, this 5 or 6 page article within a week. And so you give yourself that time frame. That's realistic. It might push it a little bit, but you're still going to give yourself that time frame. Then you'd say, well, what would it look like if I could do this a little bit, if I could do it a little bit better or a little bit faster? You might say, I'm going to write the article in 5 days. So now you're giving yourself a goal to strive for, but you're still being very realistic with that week time frame. And then you keep doing that. You say, okay, if I could do it even better or even faster, I do it in maybe 3 days. So your ultimate goal is to, if I could do it, sit down and just write it. But often what happens is you may not have enough energy to do it all in one sitting. So you want to give yourself the ability to celebrate your successes and to have some of that internal motivation. And that's kind of what goal attainment scaling can do for you. So I hope that helps a little bit, but the recalibration thing, extremely important. The biggest thing that you need to be aware of is when you're recalibrating, make sure that you start with something that is realistic, but challenging for you. And then from there, challenge yourself more and more and more. Okay, I hope that was helpful. Jane says, I call it turning into a pumpkin. Poof, like Cinderella's coach. I'm a squash brain and often cannot walk, talk, or move. That is exactly what neurofatigue is. It completely wipes you out, shuts you down. And again, it can last for an extended period of time. One of the things that we're going to be talking about today is what are some of the triggers and helping you recognize maybe some of the triggers, and then learning to pace yourself so that hopefully you can learn to regulate yourself a little bit and maybe not hit the wall as often. I don't know if it's possible to say you're just not going to have neurofatigue. I don't think that's realistic at all. But I think what you can do is you can regulate yourself to the point where you can control it to a certain extent. Let's see. Kim says, great to know this is a known symptom. Never understood what was happening to me when it happened. Okay. Very, very good. I'm glad that this is insightful for you. Betsy says, if you become aware this happens, can you circumvent the fatigue by attempting to incorporate brain breaks several times a day to get ahead of it? Yeah, we're going to talk about pacing, and that actually is you becoming aware, building an awareness of how you're feeling, what the triggers are, planning ahead, and lots of other things. So we're going to give you some strategies, Elizabeth, and we hope that they'll help. If they don't, be sure and tell us in this chat, and we'll try to clarify things a little bit more. Laura says, whoops, my screen is jumping. Laura says, I tell people it's neurofatigue is I've run a half marathon and I'm so tired afterwards. That could happen after going to the grocery shopping. That's a great example too. Yeah. Anytime that you can use analogies that someone without a brain injury or a neurological condition can understand, like a half marathon, that's really going to help them understand it. A lot of times people will say, I'm just so exhausted. That's how they might describe it. And a person without neurofatigue is going to go, well, I get exhausted all the time too. I don't understand, right, what the issue is. And so you really want to try and find some analogies that you can use that will help them understand it from their perspective. And Laura, that's a great, great example, half marathon or a marathon. Is closed captioning available? It is not, but it will be on the recording. Actually, on the recording, it won't be, but I'll put this into YouTube and it'll have closed captioning at that point. So that will hopefully be by later today or tomorrow. Thank you for asking, Mary. Have you had any experience with long COVID in kids? Fatigue is a big symptom experienced with long COVID. Absolutely. Among many other sensory related ones, there's more research happening around the link between COVID and brain connection. Fatigue is a huge factor for long COVID. And again, oftentimes they call it brain fog. Especially with long COVID, they're using that term brain fog more than we have in the brain injury world in the past. And I think my experience is more with adults, but I think that some of the pacing things that we're going to talk about may be helpful or should be helpful for kids as well. So let us know at the end of the webinar. And if not, then please feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to talk to you about that and see if there's anything that suggestions I might be able to make. Okay, let's see. Neurofatigue as a continuum: decreased insight and awareness, concentration, inability to use your normal strategies, and accommodations. Absolutely. One of the things, and this is why pacing is so important, Tom, if you start feeling neurofatigue and you don't do anything about it, it is going to exacerbate. So you may start with, oh, I kind of have a headache, or I'm off balance, or something like that. I'm a little bit sensitive to the light in the room or to the sounds of the room. Maybe those are some of the triggers that you have. And if you don't do something like take yourself out of that situation, it will exacerbate to the point of, basically just your system shuts down. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, Tom. Yeah, you all really need to learn, be aware of and learn the early warning signs or symptoms, as Tom has said, because if you are aware of your particular triggers and how you feel, not only what causes it to a certain extent, but also how you feel, how it makes you feel, that's going to be what you really have to pay attention to. So Christy may recognize neurofatigue coming on because of light sensitivity or sound sensitivity or something like that. I have a student who knows neurofatigue is coming about because her speech becomes problematic for her. So everyone may be a little bit different in sort of those early warning signs, if you will, of neurofatigue. You're going to have to figure out which are your symptoms, but that's something that you can definitely do. And probably many of you are already aware of this. If you think about the concept of the 4 stages of learning, we talked about the idea that ignorance is you don't know what you don't know. So you really don't know what's causing your neurofatigue. You just feel it and you're exhausted. So you're sort of in that ignorant stage where you don't know what you don't know about it. All of a sudden you become aware of these kinds of things are causing or seem to trigger neurofatigue. And so now all of a sudden you're in that awareness stage. The next thing is the learning stage. And so in the learning stage, you're learning about neurofatigue. You're actually hopefully going to learn about maybe some of the triggers, some of the signs that you can identify for yourself. And then mastery, one of the things that we've talked about mastery, and I didn't mention it in the review, is that we don't all master everything. And so, you may be stuck in kind of a learning phase, and you might feel like you've mastered it, and then you might feel like you backslide a little bit. Often, I think Christy can talk about this. Often people get to the point where they think, I've got this handled. I don't need to use strategies anymore. Right, Christy? And then all of a sudden she says a life quake happens or something changes. And now all of a sudden you have to go back and resort to those things that work for you. Thoughts about that, Christy?
And when life quakes happen, sometimes it can be something that's physical, a change that's physical, but also there's things that happen in life that could be emotional, and that ends up triggering other things. One of the things that it took me a long time, but weather can be something
Mm.
that because of the pressure in the system. I realized that when certain pressure happens, I know that I will have some more fatigue issues.
Mhm.
So learning and being aware of what has changed and kind of looking at that will be very helpful, because sometimes the change, it could be ever so slight and you don't know.
Mhm.
And these things happen over and over again. But um,
I think, let's see, Lisa and Jane are saying that your spouses or your family members are the ones who often see it and point it out to you. I think that's very common. When you are at that point where you're not aware that it's happening or you don't know what's causing it, oftentimes those around you are the ones that see it before you see it in yourself. And so I encourage you to listen to them. That's an important thing to be aware of. Someone asked, will the symptoms stay with us for life? I wish I had an answer to that question. I can't say that they won't. I can't say that they will. I think that you can learn to pace yourself to sort of alleviate the symptoms as best as possible. But I can tell you that fatigue is one of the top ongoing symptoms after brain injury in particular. There's been some research that shows 5 to 7 years out after a brain injury, fatigue is one of the top concerns of those living with brain injury. So it can stick around, but I do believe that there are some things that you can do that will help you. So, and that's where we're going. We wanted to give you just a few energy metaphors that are typically used to express or to talk about neurofatigue. So the first one is a fuel tank. So often what happens is, we have a full fuel tank and we're doing just fine. And have you ever noticed that as you get towards the bottom of the fuel tank, it seems like it drops so much faster than it does at the top? Well, that's often what happens. You got a full fuel tank and all of a sudden it's empty and you don't even know why. It's like, what? I don't even feel like I've driven that far. How could I have used up all that? It's almost like the gas gets siphoned out of your tank, if you will. So the empty tank is one of the metaphors that's used. Another metaphor is the battery metaphor. So you feel like you can accomplish and process and communicate whatever you want. You're doing great. You've got a full battery. And then again, all of a sudden, the battery is empty. And you'll notice here that in both cases, I have the full battery and the empty battery, the full tank and the empty tank. And the reason I did that, I don't have a whole lot of batteries in between, right? I don't have 3 tick marks or 2 tick marks because for so many people, it just happens. It's not like this progressive thing. It just, you're here and then you're there. So we did that on purpose just to sort of illustrate that. The spoon metaphor, typically, and there's different ways that people talk about this, but the idea is you have so many spoons that you can use each day, and each spoon is a different size and has a little bit, larger space to it. And you really have to, once your spoons are used up, you're done. You need to just stop. So that's something that we're going to talk about. And the spoon thing kind of fits most with the idea of pacing yourself as you go throughout your day. Again, in this particular case, you've got a fixed number of spoons that you have available to you, and you need to use them carefully and strategically because when the spoons are gone, then you're done. Again.
I wanted to add that with the tank scenario and the spoon scenario, one of the things that was a aha moment for me early on with my brain injury was that with a brain injury, we no longer, when we hit that wall, we do not have any reserve. And when somebody will say, "Oh, I'm tired," or whatever, and they are able, people without a brain injury can go that extra mile. It's kind of like going back to the using the tank, the gas tank. The light goes on and you're empty, but you know that you have, for those of us that have tested that to see that, oh, it's on empty, but I can't get to the gas station quite yet, and you run out of gas. You knew that you had, I don't know how many X miles left, and that you were able to, yes, the tank says empty, but I can still do all of this and still finish. We don't have that reserve. And after those spoons are gone, they're gone. And you, the you can't do anything. There is no reserve. And that was so helpful to have somebody just say that out loud, because I couldn't figure out why it was just this hit the wall and you're done, because you're so used to prior. For those of us that went to school and college, those overnighters staying up, okay, yeah, you're tired. You end up going to take that test, and you're able to continue to do, push that I'm tired thing. We can't push I'm tired thing. There is no reserve.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the reserve thing, because that is such an important concept where we are used to having a little bit left over, without the brain injury. You had a little bit left over. And when you have a little bit left over, you can kind of rejuvenate a little bit better. But when you have nothing left, it's very hard to build that back up without just, completely not doing anything. So very good. Thank you, Christy. Some great comments in the chat here. Let me go to the next slide. Some great comments in the chat in terms of Lynn says, I can so relate to that. Thought I was doing so much better, and so did way too much work-related stuff, and then hit the neurofatigue wall. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges is you feel like you're doing better. You feel like you're feeling okay, because you really don't have that level of awareness that you need in order to kind of pace yourself and to deal with this. And so you just keep pushing. Another example is, well, I just need 5 more minutes. And if I do this, I'll finish it in 5 minutes and then I'll be done with it. I won't have to worry about it. Problem is oftentimes after a brain injury, your perception of time has been impacted. So what feels like 5 minutes to you is actually a half an hour sometimes. And so you're not just working for 5 more minutes, you're working for an extra half an hour, and that's all it takes to push you beyond that point of no return, so to speak, when it comes to neurofatigue. The other thing that happens sometimes, and we're going to have a webinar on time management, so we'll be talking about some of these things in the future. But another thing that often happens after a brain injury is your ability to estimate how much time something will take has been impacted. And so you think it's going to take you 5 minutes, but it really takes you a lot longer. And as you go through this, all of these things can have an impact on you pushing past that point of no return and hitting that neurofatigue wall. So very important. My car brain can't get the gas mileage that it used to have. Okay, I love that, Tom. Very good. Caitlin says, yes, I used to have reserves and now I don't. And that awareness is critical, Caitlin. You now know that. And so now you have the ability to do something about it. And this goes back to those 4 stages of learning again. If you don't know that you don't have the reserve, you're just going to keep doing it and keep making the same mistake over and over. Now that you have that level of awareness, it's time to start working with that and doing something about it. So that's great. Let's see. Would it be possible to work full-time even if you have neurofatigue? I think people certainly can go back to work if they have neurofatigue. It really depends on how severe it is, what your triggers are, whether it's a full-time job or a part-time job. There's so many different variables that are associated with that. So I can't say for sure yes or no, but know that all of those variables are going to be a huge component to it. The other thing that will happen with neurofatigue is it can exhaust you physically, but it can also exhaust you mentally. And so one of the things I mentioned earlier was I have a student, when she experiences neurofatigue, in a second in my class, her speech will go from very fluid to kind of a stutter. We all know at that point in time that that person is hitting that mark. And she's now aware of it. And so she can then, do some things to help, hopefully not go too far into that space. This is so great to hear articulated. I experienced this, but have kept pushing and learned the hard way that there's no reserve to draw on. Good. Let's see. No reserve. Christy, you're a popular gal. Thank you for mentioning that. You always cover things that I forget. Thank you. Let's see. Real
I,
quick, I'm just checking the chat. Do you see anything else in the chat,
there
Christy, that
was
you want to
somebody that
address?
said here, I had major fatigue going back to work. And I think one of the things that people want to return to pre injury life. And one of those things is to go back to work. And one of the things that I'm not quite sure, I don't know the situation in this case, but one of the things that I would have to um, put my spin on that is that I don't know if outpatient therapy or any kind of therapy happened where you were able to practice and be able to have strategies set in place. I know that I have friends that are going through that transitional period after being in Michelle's class, trying to pretend to put blocks of time that they're starting
Mm,
to work on something, and they use our app to um, help keep track of how much time they're being able to spend, and then be able to add strategies and to add things to what would help for the next time they attack an activity of something that would be work related. But I don't think that we practice those things that we need to do for work and before we go back. And then when we go back to work, we don't know how many, how to break up our day into, you know, putting a lot of energy and concentration on this one thing that takes a lot of time. That's another thing, is we're not aware that this takes, a phone call could take much more energy than writing an email. Now,
yeah.
to me, um, I'm the opposite. Writing an email would take a lot more energy than a phone call. So, being able to know what is a little easier and what's a little harder, to be able to know where to plan those activities in the day. So,
Mhm.
I understand that going back to work without practice, without awareness of things that are going to trigger you, and things of your that are going to be more taxing, activities that are more taxing, it might be harder to go back to work.
Yeah. A couple people have said, I'm back at work or I'm just getting ready to go back to work. Again, I think people can go back to work even if they experience certain levels of neurofatigue. One thing that I would recommend, there is a organization called the Job Accommodation Network. They go by JAN, Job Accommodation Network. I highly recommend that you reach out to them. They work specifically to help individuals with disabilities, and they have a whole brain injury, cognitive, neurological sort of section that they can help you understand accommodations and what might be beneficial for you. And they can also play the role of a liaison between you and your employer. So I really recommend. They have a great website, lots of very good information. They did a webinar a couple of months ago, and my class and I joined in on their webinar. I've been following the Job Accommodation Network for years, decades, really. And so I highly recommend that you check that out and see, if you're going back to work, if that might be helpful for you. So Laura says Jan was extremely helpful. So that's awesome. I'm so glad. Um, David asks, is there a test or a formal diagnosis of neurofatigue? I don't know that there is a formal test for neurofatigue. If you go to, one second here, sorry. We have an issue with the dog. These are the realities of webinars these days. Uh, if you have if you go to a doctor, they will ask you different kinds of questions, and I think at that point in time, they will be able to help you recognize the neurofatigue. But I'm personally not aware of a test or an assessment that they do that actually diagnoses it per se. And there's other professionals on the webinar right now. So if you know of something I don't, which I'm sure that's true, go for it. Please share in the chat or wherever. Appreciate that. Okay. Let's go ahead and move forward, and we'll come back to our list as we go through. So do you know when you're neurofatigued? Some of you obviously have said yes. Some of you have said, you know what, my family knows it before I do. You do know, but you don't often recognize it until it's too late. And that's a big factor. What we want to do is we want to help you identify it earlier on, with some of the symptoms and some of the triggers that may cause it for you, so that you can learn to adjust to it and deal with it more effectively. So how do you or others know when you're neurofatigued? Well, there's cognitive symptoms, there might be physical symptoms, emotional symptoms, and stress symptoms. So poor focus and the inability to make a decision may be a trigger or an identification for you. You're not able to multitask. Your thinking slows. You become more forgetful. Speech difficulties, as I mentioned, those are all cognitive symptoms. Physical symptoms might be the light sensitivity that I mentioned earlier, sound sensitivity. You can barely move. Like trying to navigate the movement of your body can actually become very challenging for you when you're at a supreme high level of neurofatigue. Also, you can't sleep. So you think, well, I'm just going to lie down and rest, or I'm going to take a nap. And then you're so fatigued that you can't take a nap. And so it gets in this vicious cycle. Emotional symptoms, you might be highly emotional. You might cry very easily. You might be crabby or upset with others. Someone mentioned that her family recognizes when she's neurofatigued because of her behavior change. You may have increased frustration, not only with others, but with yourself as well. Stress symptoms include anxiety and frustration, shutting down, again, crying easily may be a stress symptom as well, and perseveration, not being able to let go of something. You get fixated on something and you can't let it go. That's perseveration. That can be a stress symptom of neurofatigue. So now we're going to go back to our chat and to our discussion. Do you know what your signs are for you experiencing neurofatigue? Let's take a look at what we have here. I'm just looking through the chat. Sorry. Let's see. Christy, do you see anything? Loss of cognitive reserve can be tested. My chat keeps jumping. Sorry. I'm losing track. Let's see. The British version of JAN is called the British Association of Supported Employment. Oh, good. Thank you for sharing that, Lisa. That's great. Let's see. Bethany, oh, thank you. In rare cases, oh gosh, it jumped again. Doggone it. In some cases, basic labs are helpful to check out generally, but no formal testing for neurology clinic, etc. So thank you for that. Nausea. Oh, that's a good one. So perhaps you experience some nausea, and that is a sign that you may be experiencing neurofatigue. Can't find my words. Okay. Dizziness, speech impairment, headaches. I didn't have that down. I don't know why, but yeah, headaches absolutely can be problematic. Speech slows down, emotions and anger kind of take over. Yeah.
Erica's got a question here. Are we considered people with a disability after brain injury?
Yes, brain injury, you would qualify for services and assistance and stuff like that if you're living with a brain injury. Now, I can't say that you're going to get all support services or anything like that, but typically brain injury is considered a disability. Yeah. Off balance, clumsy. Yeah, all of those are very typical kinds of signs. Light and sound sensitivity. Will this recording be available after the live webinar? Yeah, you will get a email that will give you a link to the recording. Mental fog, blurred speech, inability to focus. Okay. Interesting. Sandra says, I also find left side problems return when she's experiencing neurofatigue. So very, very lots of common issues. So okay. It is important to, Tom says, oops, I just lost him again. It's important to trust your own feelings because other people can see that you are doing well, doing a good job, but they don't have any awareness of how much energy, there you go, Tom, how much energy and effort it takes you to look good. That's such an important statement, Tom. You may be able to sort of pull it off, if you will, but people don't necessarily know how much energy it takes to pull it off. For instance, you might go out to dinner with friends or family and you're able to, carry on a conversation. Everyone's enjoying themselves. Your family or friends may not know how much energy that's taking out of you, how much focused concentration it's taking you to be there in that moment and with all the distractions and stuff. And they may not know that you go home and then you're down and out for a day or for 2 days. So very important. Okay, let's go ahead. And now we're going to take a look at triggers and we're going to start talking about some of the pacing strategies. So we know, some of the triggers, you've expressed some of the triggers, but let's go ahead and just take a look at a few that we came up with. Complicated things that require high level processing and comprehension can certainly be a trigger of neurofatigue. Multitasking, doing too much, doing it for too long is another one. Driving, or Christy even had writing in a car. So I'll have her talk about that in just a moment. Working for too long without taking a break. Prolonged periods of hyper-focusing can definitely be a trigger. Overstimulation, crowds, large stores, restaurants. If you go into a Costco, you may be completely triggered in a moment. If you went into a small neighborhood store, you might be fine. So this is part of the strategy that you're going to have to start thinking about in terms of your own issues that you're having. Conversations with more than one person at a time can be problematic. Too much screen time definitely can be a problem. Stressful conversations and situations and heat. Christy, for Christy, heat's a huge trigger, isn't it, Christy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the riding in a car? I thought that was such a great, insightful one.
The riding in the car is twofold for me. One of the things I had from my brain injury was a imbalance issue. And so because of the movement, it really any kind of movement of a turn or a bump or something would just really hit me into a fatigue. And then as time has progressed and I got vestibular therapy for that imbalance issue, I was able to, that went away, the movement went away, but the lights,
Mhm.
when you're traveling in the afternoon sun, where it's shade light, shade light, shade light, would affect me, or bright lights. So very dark glasses, hat, visor, would have to, and riding in the car, you have to go to your appointments, and it's really hard to, be okay before you leave and get in the car and go to the doctor's appointment, and you're just wiped from that
Yeah.
experience. So something as simple as that, people, it's hard to see that something that you didn't even think anything, you didn't do anything, but just a ride in the car could put you in.
Yeah. Yep. Understood. Thank you for sharing that, Christy. So now we're going to talk a little bit about kind of pacing your daily activities. So these are some strategies that you can think about. Brainstorm your activities that need to be worked on or accomplished. Sort of take a few minutes out and think about what you need to do. Take time to plan out some steps. Often if you start getting neurofatigued, you may not be able to think of what the next step is. So sort of be prepared for that. Have some of those steps laid out already. Plan to add some extra time that if you think it's going to take you half an hour, I always say add a third, but you can add a third or you can add, a half, but add a little bit more time. If you finish it before the end of that added time period, that's great. Now you have some time to rest or to take a break or something like that. Whereas if you back yourself into a corner and you have one thing after the other, and this goes back to time management as well. But if you back yourself into a corner and you have one thing planned and you don't give yourself the extra time, if that thing takes longer, you're now behind. And that causes stress and that causes neurofatigue. So it almost becomes like a snowball effect.
I wanted to add to that,
Yeah.
things take longer anyway. So one of the things that after a brain injury or right away after a brain injury and then even past living with one, um, you are going to learn that it takes a lot longer to do certain things. And to add time to be able to work on them is helpful. And knowing that you're not going to try to box yourself into that time period. The other is adding time will also be essential because you're going to be adding breaks. So not only does it take longer, but it'll to do something, even if you worked on the whole time on something, but if you're going to add breaks, it's going to add more time. So just to always keep that in mind, to add time to work on an activity would be a good idea.
Yeah. Great. Think about the level of energy required for the activity that you're going to do. And that's going to vary from activity to activity. I'm just going to use a social situation. Let's say that I'm going out to, have coffee with someone. It could be where I go to have coffee that might take more energy out of me because it takes longer to get there or it's noisier or something like that. It could also be the person that I'm going with. Maybe the person that I'm going with talks very fast, or maybe the person I'm going with has some kind of attribute to them that makes me tired faster or that exhausts me. Be aware of that. Knowing how much energy is required and anticipating how much time you can do that are really important in sort of this whole pacing idea that we're trying to present. Prioritize your activities. Make sure that you know what really needs to get done, and so that you have the energy to do those things. That's going to be an important part of this. Break your activities into small pieces. Chunk them up so that, you spend a little bit of time and then maybe take a short break and then a little bit more time. Set short amounts of time to work on the activity and think of strategies that will help you keep your triggers at a minimum and help you stay focused. So these are just some tips or tricks for you to think about that may be helpful. And some of you may be thinking, oh, well, this is very typical stuff. I totally get this. It's interesting because although what we're presenting seems very logical and it seems like, oh, yeah, of course, I'm going to do that. Or of course, I already do that. I can tell you from my experience in working with brain injury over all these years, it is logical. People think they do it and they don't. One of the reasons is because they never had to do this stuff before their injury. And so they don't think to do it now, or they resent the fact of having to do it now. And so it's just like, nope, I didn't have to do this before. I'm not going to do it now. And often that leads, that's detrimental to you. So please be aware that these may not seem like they're that special or that important, but they really, really are. Pace your activities. Again, track symptoms before and after an activity. We're going to talk very briefly about the best suite and Pace My Day, and that's going to be an important component, something we've incorporated into Pace My Day. Work on only one activity at a time. Try to focus on one activity. If you try to multitask, that can bring on neurofatigue really quickly. Periodically ask yourself whether you should continue working on the task. How am I doing? Should I keep going? Should I stop? Should I take a break? Again, that's something that a lot of times people don't do. And then take breaks before you hit the wall. That's all about pacing. So you also need to know what kinds of breaks are going to be rejuvenating for you. For some people, that might be walking or taking a nap or listening to music or walking the dog. It can be whatever. Each person's going to have a different type of break that is going to help rejuvenate them. So keep that in mind.
I wanted
So
to
we wanted to
add,
give you one. Oh, sorry.
I wanted to add to that, give yourself permission to take breaks, because
Mhm.
I think our society is that if you take breaks, considered lazy. So you have this ingrained in yourself that taking a break is being lazy. You're not going to get things done. That's not going to work with a brain injury, that you're going to need to take breaks. Um, it was very helpful for me to learn that I could get far more done just taking a side step and taking a break of some sort while trying to accomplish an activity, because then that way I could come back more rejuvenated, and to be able to continue working on something and to break things up in chunks. That was, being able to give yourself permission to do something also gives that permission to take that break.
Yeah, that's great. We just have a few minutes left, so we're going to quickly go through this scenario. We came up with a scenario of going to lunch with a friend, and so here's some strategies that you might take advantage of to help you really kind of pace yourself. Check your schedule. If you have multiple things in a day and you check in with yourself and you say, well, this is kind of a higher energy task, this isn't, make sure that you are going to have the energy that you need and that you're going to have energy left over from that. So check your schedule and don't put too much in there too soon. Assess the amount of energy that's needed for that. That could be the amount of energy needed to talk to that particular person. That could be the amount of energy it's going to take to get ready, the amount of energy it's going to take to drive to the location. As Christy said, driving and even being a passenger can be problematic. Assess your possible trigger points and plan ahead, strategize. If your trigger points are a lot of music or noise, then go to a coffee shop and sit outside where maybe you don't hear the music and noise that's going on inside. Wear earbuds or something like that, noise cancellation. I have Apple AirPods that have noise cancellation, and they're great because I can put them in and they really do the noise cancellation, but I can hear what's going on, immediately in front of me. Plan and prioritize and add extra time, as we mentioned. Identify and implement strategies to minimize the triggers, which I was just talking about, and identify the appropriate rest activities after you have the lunch. Christy was very adamant about this when we were talking about, she's like, plan your rest beforehand. Know that you're going to be tired after having lunch with a friend or coffee with a friend. And so just plan an appropriate level of rest ahead of time so that you don't try to push yourself too far. Okay, so we have, again, just a couple of minutes. We may go over a few minutes today. I hope this has been helpful for you. There's been some good discussion, I think, and so hopefully this going over a couple minutes will be okay. Any thoughts or comments about this last section? Give yourself encouragement and support for taking breaks instead of just permission. Oh, interesting. Encourage yourself to do it. That's a good idea. Any other thoughts about that? Okay, well, I'm just going to mention Pace My Day. We kind of ran out of time here, but Pace My Day is the app that we have created. It's part of our best suite, and Pace My Day is designed specifically with everything that we've talked about today in mind. We incorporate the integration of strategies. You can take notes. You identify how much energy a particular task is going to take out of you from your perspective. You can set a certain amount of time in order to make sure that you check in with yourself and not overdo it. You can rate your symptoms both before a task and after a task so that you can begin to get an idea of which tasks are really starting to trigger certain kinds of symptoms in you. And then it also encourages you to take a break. We'll be having some Pace My Day webinars coming up this year. So, and we'll be talking about it, but if you have any questions, please let us know about that. This is our best suite. As I mentioned, we actually have 5 apps in one. Pace My Day is one of those apps. We have 2 more webinars coming up in this particular series. Self-regulation and 2 questions to ask yourself to take back control is going to be on February 26th. And executive function and why it matters after brain injury is going to be on March 12th. We'll also be starting another series in April, I believe it is. We have a Facebook group. If you'd like to join us, we would love that. We would really appreciate you giving us a shout out on social media. Give us a shout out. Just send me an email or send Christy an email. We'd really love to hear what you think of our webinar series. If you are able, we do our webinar series for free. We want to be here to help you. We do an after hours, etc. So if you'd like to donate to help us out, we would really appreciate that. You can go to our website, bestconnections.org, for that purpose. And one final thing before we leave, I wanted to mention, let's see if I can find it here. I wanted to mention that we are going to start a workshop series. So if you go to our website, bestconnections.org, and go to cognitive workshops, you will see our first workshop series is our first workshop in the series is self-regulation and 2 questions. It's going to be on Fridays from 10 to 12 Pacific time. We are offering scholarships to brain injury survivors. It's going to be 2 hours over the course, 2 hours a week for 3 weeks. So there is a time commitment to it, but we are really going to do a deep dive into self-regulation. We're going to provide some educational material to you. And then on that 2-hour time frame each week, we're really going to try and customize it and help you as best we can. So if you want to take a look at this, if you're interested, you can definitely sign up if you have a brain injury and you are struggling financially. Please apply for our scholarship. There's a scholarship application that you can click on and fill out. We do ask that you request a letter of support from a professional that you may be working with. And basically, that is going to be our webinar today. I'm going to put up our thank you screen. That's my email and Christy's email. If there is any questions or anything, Lillian, sorry that you're hitting a wall. I completely understand. We're talking about neurofatigue, and it happens because there's so much that's been talked about. There is a poll that should have popped up. If you would give us an idea of what you think of the webinar, we would really appreciate that. We're always looking to improve if we can. And thank you so much for joining us. Bethany, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate I think this is Bethany, is a neurologist and a doctor. And so I really appreciate your comments and the feedback that you gave the chat about the testing and stuff. Someone did mention, one second, Christy, someone did mention that she wanted to know before she goes back to work, should she consult with a neuropsychologist or a doctor? And the answer to that question, I believe, is absolutely you should. You were mentioning that you were having some significant symptoms still, and that you were planning on going back to work. I would absolutely consult with your doctor, neurologist, neuropsychologist, maybe a couple of different doctors before you do that, especially if you're experiencing, symptoms. So please do that. I don't know where you are, who your doctors are, but I highly encourage that if it's possible at all. We do an after hours. So we're going to jump off of here in just a second. We'll go into Zoom where we can see each other and chat back and forth.
Caitlin told me that the Zoom password I put in wrong was, there's no 3 in there. So sorry.
I just put the information in again, so that'll be the last thing in the chat.
Okay,
And
good.
again, thank you so much for joining us today. We will see you in the after hours in just a moment. And I hope that we see you in a couple weeks for self-regulation. We're very excited about that one too. Take care, everybody.
For those of you that are new to us, we have a Zoom after this, so you can join us to discuss more. We can hear, it can be an ongoing conversation instead of just in the chat. So that's what the Zoom thing is for if you're new to
our webinars. Yeah, perfect. Okay, we'll see you in just a couple minutes, hopefully in our Zoom. Take care.